All right, Baltimore City Council Ways and Means Committee, we're back for fiscal year 2022 budget hearings. Specifically, we're here for City Council Ordinance 21-0080, Ordinance of Estimates for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022. I'm Eric Costello, Councilman for the 11th District, Chair of the committee. I'm joined in chambers by Vice Chair for the afternoon session, Councilman Isaac Gitzy Schleifer, 5th District, member of the committee. We are joined virtually by Council Vice President Sharon Green Middleton, 6th District, member of the committee, Councilman Ryan Dorsey, 3rd District, member of the committee, Councilman James Torrance, 7th District, Councilman Mark Conway, 4th District, Councilwoman Odette Ramos, 14th District, Councilman Robert Stokes, 12th District, member of the committee, Councilman Chris Burnett, 8th District, member of the committee, Councilwoman Felicia Porter, 10th District. Joining us on behalf of Mayor Brandon Scott is Natasha Mehew and Nina Themlis. Joining us on behalf of Council President Nick Mosby is Matt Stegman and Nikki Thompson. Staff to the committee is Marguerite Curran. We're going to start off with State's Attorney Mosby. She has a presentation, ma'am. State's Attorney, I'm going to ask you to keep that to 20 minutes or less. Floor is yours. Please bring up your presentation. And then we will get into council member questions.
Okay. So first and foremost, I want to say good afternoon, Mr. President, Mr. Chair, members of the Budget and Appropriations Committee. As you all are aware, the mission of the Office of the State's Attorney for Baltimore City is to safeguard communities through the effective prosecution of crime. Justice is the only barometer of our success in our office, which is why our prosecutors are sworn to aggressively pursue justice over convictions in every case. In this pursuit, we have not been without our fair share of challenges as it relates to Baltimore's crime fight and restoring faith in our local criminal justice system. But even despite the unprecedented challenges we've faced as a city, my office has met those challenges with triumph and remained steadfast in its commitment to accountability, professionalism, and transparency. Understanding that our city must address the financial constraints resulting from an unprecedented global pandemic of the past year, public safety in Baltimore still requires my agency to be well supported across the board in order to adequately support victims and witnesses of crime and to hold violent repeat offenders accountable. As this legislative body is aware, my office has heavily relied on state grant funds for the staffing needs necessary to accomplish our mission. In fact, since the start of my administration, we've increased the overall state grant funding in my office by 38% in order to meet the personnel needs of my office. To date, we fund 72 positions, and during the fiscal year 2021, we received a total of $7.2 million in grant funding for programs and personnel. While we're grateful that we were able to temporarily supplement outside the city the staffing needs of our office, state grant funds are not always guaranteed and should not be considered a long-term permanent solution to the staffing needs of one of the most important law enforcement agencies in the city. Historically, my office has stayed within our budgeted and recommended general fund amounts, often using salary savings to offset any potential overruns within the general fund budget. But this year, a number of our grant funds have been cut from the state. Consequently, my office is now stretched to the breaking point to maintain adequate staffing levels. Because of the precarious situation we now find ourselves in, we not only ask that you pass our budget, but we want to make you aware that we will be seeking your support in supplementing the grant funds that we lost and or are likely to lose in the very near future, which is essential, again, for the functioning of my office. We outlined this request to the mayor's office on January 27, 2021, and have not yet received a response, and our request was not addressed in the budget being considered today. However, given the essential role my office plays in the crime fight by holding violent repeat offenders accountable and keeping them off our streets, we respectfully request your assistance in supporting our efforts to, 1, secure permanent funding for 24 of our essential victim witness advocate positions in the general city budget, replenish the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention grants that were cut to the MSIN project, increase the ability of our office to receive necessary training, professional development, and provide adequate HR staffing to ensure we're able to manage the ongoing implementation of the workday timekeeping and payroll system imposed upon our office and all city agencies. Our request reflects a mere 8% overall in our budget from the previous year of fiscal year 2021. Following my opening remarks, my Chief of Administration, Camille Blakefall, will answer any specific questions of the proposed fiscal year 2022 budget, but I'd like to use my time this morning to provide you with a top-level view of how we have prioritized spending in my office to more effectively prosecute perpetrators of senseless crime, better serve victims and witnesses, and run a more efficient and effective administration and operation. So I guess we'll start with this. And is this the first slide? I hope I'm doing this right. Okay. Okay, good. All right, so Service 115, prosecution of criminals. The prosecution of criminals across Baltimore City is a priority for our agency, with a recommended $37,655,974 amount allotted in the fiscal year 2022 budget for this effort. As State's Attorney, my top priorities have been targeting violent repeat offenders, building public trust in law enforcement, and running a transparent and accountable administration. In 2020, in light of the global pandemic, my ASAs still filed and or handled, not including juvenile or citation cases, 2,889 felonies, 12,045 misdemeanors, and 9,861 traffic offenses. In the district court in 2020, we closed 8,230 cases, not including traffic and citation cases. And in 2021, we closed 5,077 cases thus far, not including traffic and citation cases. My ASAs have continued to remove repeat violent offenders from our streets and diverted low-level offenders to opportunities outside the life of crime, including this past year, where we had a repeat violent offender, Michael Williams, who was sentenced to 45 years in prison for armed robbery, use of a firearm in the commission of a violent crime, possession of a regulated firearm. On March 10th, DeAndre Sleet was sentenced to life plus 25 years, with the first 10 years to be served without the possibility of parole. Sleet was found guilty in December of 2019 for the felony murder of Timothy Morricone and related charges, including using a handgun in a crime of violence, felon in possession of a handgun, conspiracy to commit armed robbery, and weird carry and transport of a handgun. On September 29th, the SAO, in partnership with the Baltimore Police Department's West Side Major Case Squad, announced the indictment of 7 suspected drug trafficking organizations charged with a range of crimes from conspiracy to volume dealer, as well as possession with intent to distribute. And if convicted, all charges, the group faces a total of 400 years imprisonment. As we move past 2020 and into 2021, my ASAs have remained consistently under pressure as we're working to successfully address the backlog of cases related to the court closures and limited operations in light of COVID-19. Through mid-May of 2021, we've closed thus far 1,967 criminal cases in circuit court, and 1,328 felonies, 601 misdemeanors, and 40 appeals, and approximately closed 404 felonies and 179 misdemeanors in circuit court. The fiscal year 22 budget continues to provide support for most of the reimagining and I guess remaining general funded agencies, assistant state's attorneys, and other staff positions. But the majority, a number of them are grant funded. One of which is the Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network, which is the MSIN grant. This is a criminal justice strategy coordinated at the local, state, and federal levels, targeting gangs, drug, firearms, and human trafficking. MSIN is particularly focused on these criminal enterprises that are impacting multiple jurisdictions and accomplishes this by sharing information across those borders. It's a key element to the city's public safety strategy and provides a basis for a data-driven decisions, both operationally and for policy development. In fiscal year 21, the MSIN grant was decreased by 63% for my office, which resulted in lost funding for 2 prosecutors positions, and 1 computer analyst position and 1 database engineer. Clearly, these are imperative sort of positions, and we would ask and want to bring to your attention the need for those positions. Slide 2, service and Service 781 administration. This service funds the administrative, technological, human resources, and policy and legislative affairs work of my office with a recommended $8,074,813 going to support these efforts. The funding provided under this service also assists in maintaining and improving information systems to provide all of the SAO's initiatives, as well as supporting the personnel and technological needs related to body-worn camera video review. My body-worn camera division within the past year has uploaded more than 29,083 videos and has spent thousands of hours reviewing more than 26,898 videos. The MIS services, they service the graphic, technical, hardware, software, and network information systems needs of almost 400 employees. MIS over the past year has had its own set of unprecedented challenges with with the COVID-19 and having to work virtually. In fiscal year 22 budget, we've allocated there was an allocation of $94,079 increase in a one-time funding to continue the supportive implementation of the state mandated electronic courts project for e-filing. However, what we are requesting and want to bring to your attention to the City Council is the Workday implementation assistance that is needed. I think that very many of you have seen the hurdles and the challenges that were presented with this new Workday system, but just one of the, I guess I would just cite several sort of examples that we came across. Quasi agencies were not considered adequately prior to the Workday rollout, and were not included in most of the early information disseminated to agencies and agency HR staff. There were security limitations, and we can go on and on and on, but the fact of the matter is, in the implementation of this Workday system, we need additional staff to be able to support it. And then the other request that we would ask under this sort of service item is the need to provide training. We request that there be less than 1% increase to general fund expenditures under service number 781. The increase equates to $50,000 and will support the creation of a line item during this fiscal year and in subsequent years for staff training, which has never previously existed in the State's Attorney's Office general fund budget. Unlike many other city agencies, State's Attorney's Office does not have a line item sufficient funds allocated each year to support staff training and development, and as such, each fiscal year we struggle to regularly provide training opportunities to prosecutors and staff to learn about and keep abreast of the ever-changing landscape of criminal law and practice, an essential component to better overall performance, increased productivity, and general job satisfaction. Slide 3, Service 786, Victim Witness Services. As you all are very much aware, in Baltimore City, victim and witness services are paramount to any successful prosecution and/or crime reduction strategy. We rely on victims and witnesses. We are the home of stop snitching mentality. I recognize the tremendous amount of work that we all need to do to break down those silos and the barriers of distrust that exist between the community and law enforcement. And I remain grateful that we as a city, we're working together to address the change, to change this culture in our communities. But the victim witness unit is incredibly important in my office because it assists victims and witnesses of crime by providing counseling and guidance, notification of rights, and support in court, and monetary resources and reimbursement where needed. For witnesses of crime determined to be at risk of intimidation or retribution, our division provides relocation assistance, temporary and permanent, new housing, and other limited forms of financial support, including vouchers for food, travel, and expenses. In an effort to combat witness intimidation, as we've discussed more recently in this council, in fiscal year 2020, the state's attorney created a multi-platform victim witness campaign to create awareness of the multitude of services provided by my office to victims and witnesses of crime in Baltimore City, reassuring the community that we're here for them during the entire criminal justice process from the beginning to the very end and beyond. We actually offer lifetime grief counseling through the only family bereavement center in the state of Maryland out of the state's attorney's office. This campaign was expanded in 2020 to address the rise in domestic violence cases, which we saw as a result of the stay-at-home orders and stress the association pertaining to, we believe, attributable to COVID. But this is the most important request, and I want to extend this because I think that it's important. Again, we wanted to put it on your radar, understanding and recognizing that the council does not have the ability to reallocate resources yet, but this is something that at some point in the near future, we would look to the council to be able to do. We are requesting an increase in our general fund expenditures under service number 786 to further support the agency's ability to provide robust services to victims and witnesses of crime. And this proposed increase equates to about $2 million, a little over $2.3 million, and will support the salaries and fringe benefits of 24 victim witness advocates, currently or previously funded by grant dollars, where those grant funds have been abolished or may soon be abolished. We are actually in our last year of our VOCA funding. In 2016, the Maryland Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services awarded my office a substantial increase in VOCA funding to expand the office's victim witness unit and hire additional victim witness advocates to support victims and witnesses of crime during the trial process. At present, fiscal year 2022 21, VOCA funding covers the salaries and fringe benefits of 24 victim witness advocates. And these victim witness advocates are considered integral to the state attorney's office staff, necessary to support thousands of victims and witnesses pre, post, and during trial. And the availability of grant funds vary greatly from year to year, placing all staff and services covered by those funds in a very precarious position when funding is lost. The one thing I can say is while we received some federal VOCA funding through the state, VOCA victim assistance grants were cut by 32% in fiscal year 19, an additional 26% in fiscal year 20. With pending federal legislation, state VOCA assistance grants could be cut by an additional 64% by fiscal year 2022. And so unless funding is supplemented, the entire fund balance could be depleted within a year or two. And so the dedicated victim witness advocates assist the victims and witnesses of crime, as I stated before, and we're providing a variety of services, including interviewing victims and witnesses, preparing them for trial, accompanying victims and witnesses to court, assisting with claims for compensation, restitution, coordinated victim witness impact statements. And in the past 2 years, my office has served more than 18,586 victims and witnesses, which is 34 times the number of 500, which was when my administration first started, 546 victims and witnesses. Last year alone, the office served more than 8,644 victims and witnesses, despite being in the midst of a public health crisis. We did so virtually. And as such, if the state's attorney's office VOCA funds are abolished or further decreased, the agency will be forced to lay off 24 victim witness advocates exclusively charged with supporting the victims and witnesses of crime in Baltimore City. And so, again, without their assistance, the work of my prosecutors to ensure that victims and witnesses of crime are identified and ready and able to participate during the criminal trial process will be significantly diminished. And so, again, we're asking that this budget be passed, but we did want to bring to your attention, each of your the members of this legislative body, the need for us to be able to get these general fund budgets, these positions in the general fund budget, and the importance of it. And so I guess I have another sort of focus around young people, as you all are aware. Last but certainly not least, I'd like to just touch upon our efforts to not only serve city and youth and the prevention of violence, but to take a holistic approach to the prosecution of crime in a city where we already know that 25% of Baltimore's population is living in poverty and 35% of children live below. And so this administration is making significant strides to invest and engage in our youth. We know that the juvenile arrests right now, juvenile offenders in Baltimore City are becoming increasingly brazen and violent. I can say that in 2020, there were over 900 juvenile arrests compared to almost 1,500 juvenile arrests in 2019. But according to the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services data, the number of youths charged as adults in Baltimore City increased 13% in 2020 when compared to 2019. And we as prosecutors are limited by the constraints of the law as to what we can do to hold violent use accountable, especially considering the Department of Juvenile Services is not within our purview, but we can attempt to reach our youth before they potentially engage in violence. And this is what we've attempted to do through our Crime Control and Prevention Division out of my office, recognizing the need to get to our young people before they get to the criminal justice system. Our Junior State's Attorney program, started in 2015, exposes 8th and 9th graders to the criminal justice field. We've touched more than 257 young people through that program alone. 95% of them have graduated from high school. 95% are either in college or on a career track, and 33% of those young people are pursuing a degree in criminal justice. Our Be More pop-up series is an exciting opportunity for young people to engage in free programming during the critical hours of 6 and 9 o'clock on Friday nights, when we know that there's a drastic sort of increase in youth violence. We've been doing this for the past 4 years, and we're going to continue to do so virtually. And last but certainly not least, we have our Great Expectations program, where we again have touched hundreds of young people, 4th and 5th graders, and attempting to go into the schools on a regular basis once a month, and we will continue to do so. But I did want to bring that to your attention because unlike other state's attorneys' offices, I think my office may be the only office in the entire country that is focusing on intervention and prevention, and actually has a crime control and prevention division dedicated to ensuring that we're getting to young folks before it's too late. And with that, I conclude.
Thank you, Madam State's Attorney. Presentation is down. Okay, we are going to turn to Councilman Schleifer first. And we've also been joined by our City Administrator, Chris Shorter's on the line, as well as Bob Seneme, the Budget Director for BBMR. Councilman Schleifer, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, State's Attorney, for being here. It's good to see you. My first question is regarding the juvenile crime, as you mentioned. One of the things that I've seen time and time again is that regardless of the type of crime committed, the judges over at juvenile are transferring the cases down to the juvenile courts, where of course the community has no idea what the outcomes are or really any follow-up. So has your office been seeing the same thing, that like pretty much close to 100% of these cases are being transferred down to juvenile?
So what we have seen, as I indicated before, is that there's about a 13% increase in the number of individuals that have been charged as adults, which means these are the more heinous sort of offenses. Statutorily, if it's an offense that carries a life sentence, your first-degree rapes, your attempted murders, your armed carjackings, they will automatically start in adult court. And the way that it works is that they can then ask that the case, the respondents or the juvenile and their defense attorneys can ask that that case, based upon 5 factors: the age of the child, the size of the child, nature of the offense, the amenability of the child to services, they can request of the court that that child be transferred back down to the juvenile system. As you're aware, Councilman, these are 2 very different systems. The adult system is geared towards retribution, and the juvenile system, which falls under the state, the purview of the state, it really focuses on rehabilitation and the best interests of that child. And so what often happens is that those individuals, those young people that are charged statutorily with those adult offenses, make the request to have their case sent back down to juvenile. And the ABLE Foundation has put out a report, probably about 2 years ago, which followed the number of cases that are being transferred back, most of which have been over our objection. But ultimately, a judge makes that determination as to whether or not those cases are transferred back. One of the things that we have done, and we will continue to do, is that we track those cases. Although we're not able to say specifically which child has been transferred back down to the juvenile system, or to provide the outcome of that case based upon the law, we are able to track with regard to numbers. So if you look at our website, one of the things that we attempt to do in an effort to be transparent is to put that number out every month. And if you have any additional questions, and I failed to mention, my chief of administration, Camille Blakefall, is here, but every single one of my division chiefs are on this call to answer any sort of specific questions that you all may have with regard to that. So yes, Councilman Schleifer, we do track that information. I can provide that information to you, and I will ensure that you receive it, but you can also go to our website and we publish that.
No, I appreciate that. I will go to your website and take a look at that. Has your office been seeing that cases, you mentioned that the juvenile courts, it's more towards rehabilitation, but then the adults courts, it's more about retribution and punishment. And so when a juvenile commits murder, are you seeing that they're being transferred down to the juvenile courts, or that they're facing consequences in the adult courts? And we're referencing like juveniles who are 16, 17 years old, not young juveniles like 10, 11, 12.
So Don Walter is on the call, and he can tell you more specifically what he's seeing. He's the division chief in juvenile. I can tell you that we, just from my cursory sort of view and approval process, I am seeing a lot of younger juveniles that are being charged with more heinous and serious offenses, such as murder. And that is one of the reasons why we are attempting to intervene and to prevent that from happening. Because if, in all actuality, I know that we look to that child and say that that's a failure on behalf of the parents, But it's a reflection and a failure on behalf of the community when a 14-year-old is being charged with murder. So that is something that we take very serious, and one of the reasons why we continue to not just have an office where we're focusing on case processing, but ensuring that we are getting to young folks before it's too late. And this is something that we've emphasized since the start of my administration. Don, did you have anything else to add, or Valda?
Yes, I'm sorry. Madam State's Attorney, Councilman Schleifer, Don Walter, I'm the Chief of Juvenile in Ms. Mosley's administration. So the issue, I think, is sort of twofold. Individuals who are 16 and older who are charged with first degree murder are not transfer eligible. So those individuals, if they're charged with first degree murder, would not be eligible to return to the juvenile system. I would say anecdotally that the bulk of the murders that we are dealing with right now in the juvenile system, as Madam State's Attorney indicated, are individuals who are so young that they cannot, by operation of law, be charged as adults without a waiver hearing. So we're dealing with a lot of 13 and 14-year-old individuals who are charged with murder. In fact, I believe that all of our active murders that we are prosecuting here in the juvenile system right now, all with the exception of one, initiated in that way. There are 13 or 14-year-old individuals who could not be charged. 13 at the time of the offense, now 14, could not be charged as adults without a waiver.
Madam State's Attorney, do you mind if I ask Mr. Walter a question?
No, please, please.
Mr. Walter, so nice to meet you. I don't know if we've ever met before. Chief of Juvenile, question for you, because I guess you're paying attention to the day-to-day. Have you ever seen Judge Kershaw not transfer somebody down to juvenile court at a transfer hearing?
We have had. Yeah.
The one thing I will say, Councilman, and I don't ever want to put any specific judge out there by name, and I don't want to put my staff in that position, but I can tell you that, you know, we have seen a number of juveniles that are transferred back. And I can just point you to the ABLE Foundation report where they tracked the names of those judges. And that's based off of their information, not necessarily ours. The information that we put out is the information that we put out on our website, and that's just based off of the numbers.
Madam State's Attorney, I want to jump in on it for a second on that. That has been something that I've found wildly frustrating, is that we're not able to track the disposition of case. I don't know if that's the right term. The outcome of the cases based on the judge. Can your office, Nina, can we add that as a request? Can you send over, just have someone send us a link to the ABLE report? And
sure.
But more importantly than that, that's helpful because I didn't know that report existed. Can you, from your perspective, running the SAO office, can you explain to me why it's so difficult to have public transparency around the outcomes of these cases based on a judge by judge basis? Does that make sense?
It does.
Without going after any single judge, I'm just talking about the larger picture.
So let me kick this to Michael Schatzow. Schatz, how would you respond to this? It's a delicate sort of balance that we deal with the court day in and day out, you know, and I don't ever want my prosecutors to be put into a position where they feel that they would be compromised in front of any particular judge. And so, Mike, how would you answer the councilman's question?
I would answer it very carefully. I would say, Councilman,
Right.
I think that
You're not a lawyer by any chance, are you?
Only during the day. One of the problems we have are all the secrecy rules that surround juvenile proceedings. And so, in fact, a study like the ABLE Foundation did, that Mrs. Mosby pointed to, could not be done today because of a law change by the General Assembly, which shields information about juveniles charged as adults until the resolution, essentially, of their transfer hearing, so that if they're transferred back to juvenile, nobody ever knows about it. in the way that the ABLE Foundation was able to go look at what happened at those transfer hearings and who the judge was. And so where we run into trouble is we have these rules surrounding grand jury secrecy. Juvenile proceeding secrecy. And that makes it difficult for us to track, because while you would think that in the abstract, we ought to be able to do just numbers and judges, sometimes because of the way the cases are assigned, it would be relatively easy for a sophisticated observer to figure out what judges we're talking about and which cases we're talking about. And we are leery about impinging on the rules of secrecy that surround the entire juvenile court system. And it has just become worse in terms of now we couldn't even be very difficult to release information about these waiver hearings because that information by statute now is shielded. So that's what I would have to say about that subject. And so the ABLE Foundation, they did that study at a time when the transfer hearings were not shielded. They were not yet shielded, is the accurate way to put it. And so they could go into the adult court records, because what happened at the transfer hearing was in adult court, and therefore it was publicly available. But now what happens in the transfer hearing, while it's in the adult court, it is by General Assembly statute shielded. So it's a very difficult proposition for us to start trying to make inroads on that secrecy.
Thank you, Mr. Schatzow, and I'm sorry for putting Mr. Walter on the spot like that. I guess I don't make such a great first impression. But can you just elaborate on that new law change that you're referencing? When was that done? And any other information that we can look up? I mean, I'm very familiar with the ABLE Foundation report, which is part of what prompted my direct question, seeing if there had been any change in behavior from the juvenile justice system since that report came to light. But can you just elaborate on the law change that you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm mute.
You're muted.
I'm sorry. I can't give you chapter and verse on it right now, but after this hearing, I can certainly send you the statute. It took effect. It took effect this year, and what the statute essentially says is that when a juvenile is charged as an adult, there can be no release of any information about that adult case until either there's a transfer hearing and the transfer is denied, or until the time for filing the motion to transfer is passed and no motion to transfer has been filed. So what was behind the statute was the desire of the General Assembly to shield from public information about juveniles charged as adults who end up having their cases handled in the juvenile system. That's the thrust of the statute. And it's parenthetically creating lots of problems, because the defense attorneys who get retained call the clerk's office, and the clerk's office can't give them any information about the case, and neither can we. So it's causing some problems that I think some unintended consequences. But that's the specific provision of the statute, and that's relatively recent. And that, again, interferes with our ability to be as transparent as we'd like to be about what's happening in juvenile court. I would say that generally, since the ABLE Foundation report was printed, there has been the percentage of cases that are transferred has gone down somewhat, but it's not significant, and on a per judge basis, there may not be much difference at all depending on the judge you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your willingness to send that over to me so I can take a look at it. I can just assure you that I'm going to have a lot of angry constituents about that once they hear about that new law change, especially as it pertains to upcoming cases that will be before you. But thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Council Vice President Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I first want to just thank you, State's Attorney Mosby, and your team for your continued efforts in educating and working with our youth, and specifically directly into the community, your community liaisons, the pop-up events that you have started at the beginning of your administration, and just moving forward, even virtually, your dedication and awareness to helping our youth has just really taken it to another level, and we appreciate that. My two questions, I know you had just talked about, I guess, your problem and help needed with workday training. Bob, can you comment on that? Or is there a way, or are you working with her office to help with that, the workday problems?
So yes, we have been working with agencies to figure out if there are any payroll issues. It's more of an issue handled not in my office directly, but with the director's office with Henry Raymond. So and Henry had shared at our presentation that the number of issues in terms of payroll have come down significantly since those first couple of weeks. So you know, if there needs to be a follow-up, I can help coordinate to connect the state's attorney with the director's office and payroll to see if there are outstanding issues. But finance has made itself available, payroll, to answer any of those, you know, complaints or issues if employees are still experiencing that. But we don't have like a dedicated person for each agency. We're just taking the requests as they come in.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Madam Vice President, if I may, if I could just allow Camille Blakefall just to interject. I know that her and her team worked really, really hard around the clock, even on weekends, to ensure that we didn't have the same sort of issues that a lot of agencies were faced with. And so I just would like her to give you all a firsthand account of what we had to go through.
Thank you very much, State's Attorney Mosby, and thank you, Vice President Middleton, for the question. To Director Seneme's point, the issues with Workday have abated fairly significantly, and I think that's a fair recitation of the state of affairs over the past 8 months. However, because of the nuances of every agency, our issues still remain, significant issues still remain. We still have individual employees who are getting overpaid in the thousands of dollars. And I think the primary issue is that each individual agency had specific human resources rules for their staff in terms of leave, in terms of pay, that have been hard to operationalize in Workday in a very nuanced way. But that isn't to say that the team hasn't been making every effort to do that. It's just that you've got thousands of employees and dozens of agencies. And so our nuances are ones that are eventually addressed, but addressed somewhat latently. And then we have to sort of play catch up. I think the other big point is that the quasi agencies in the city were not considered in the same way that agencies were considered. And so as a quasi agency, we were even behind the regular agencies in terms of, you know, having our needs met and having our particular HR rules implemented and automated. And so we're now trying to play catch up in that arena as well.
Thank you. And I see Chief Administrator Shorter is on with us, and I don't know if he has a comment, or can he help to work to iron out their particular problems with this workday. Administrator Shorter, did you have a comment at this point?
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. I just wanted to make sure that I was being attentive. As you know, and your colleagues, we have worked very hard over the last few months to make sure that we are dealing with root cause issues within the system that aren't necessarily agency specific, but instead scenario specific. And so what we mean by that is, to Camille's point, if there are workday issues that involve some pay series or some class of personnel, we have been working really hard to make sure that those kinds of issues are dealt with. What I want to do is work offline with Camille directly to make sure that any of those pay issues, so if, for example, employees were being paid more than they should, that we are working to make sure that those employees don't get that pay deducted in whole at one time, but instead are given options as they should, and according to our administrative personnel manual, that they are given options in terms of how they pay those overages back. If there are currently employees that are still being overpaid, then that is certainly news to me and would be news to the Department of Finance. And we definitely want to work as quickly as possible to rectify that situation. So again, just wanted to make sure that I was being attentive and to let the state's attorney know that we want to make sure that we rectify any of those issues as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, and glad that you have reached out and you're going to continue to streamline these workday efforts. And then my second question, in our talkings with all of the other agencies, we are reinforcing, and they are having an equity coordinator officer. Is someone in your office, they have that role and just don't have that title? Who has that? Who is taking care of the equity coordination?
We do.
Go ahead.
We do not have an equity sort of coordinator, but the one thing I can tell you is that this is something that we've emphasized to my office and for my office for the past several years. We've had mandated sort of equity trainings for my office on racial justice and equity. And one of the things I can tell you, we've always and we'll continue to maintain a commitment to doing that type of work and seeing the work that we do every day and a lens with equity and through that. And so understanding that our mission is to prioritize justice over convictions and to achieve a fair and equitable sort of outcome. I can tell you my chief of administration, who is here, Camille Blakefall, she has organized several trainings for the office, which is inclusive of Brian Stevenson's organization Equal Justice Initiative, where they provided a training on the history and lingering and systemic implications of slavery in the criminal justice system. In May of 2019, we had Kirk Bloodsworth, Executive Director of Witness to Innocence and the country's first death row exoneree, who spoke to the state's attorney's staff about his experience on death row and the need for ongoing prosecutor training. Again, that was mandated. In September of 2019, we had the Vera Institute of Justice, which provided staff with training on criminal justice reform, again, happening all around the country, and racial equity. Over the summer of 2020, we worked with Prosecutor Impact virtually last summer in light of the murder of George Floyd, where Prosecutor Impact hosted virtual trainings for our assistants to discuss systemic racism and its impact on our staff. Also in 2020, the Prosecutor Impact hosted a virtual training session on supporting victims and witnesses of crime and their support through an equity lens. In addition, we had during 2020, the Maryland State Attorneys Association and the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, which hosted various virtual training opportunities, which was shared with staff that address equity, prosecution, and implicit bias. And while none of our trainings were mandated in 2020 virtually, as they were in 2019 when we were in person, these efforts and trainings helped develop and the staff and from the equity sort of lens. And then we also had, the last one was when we brought in the city.
Right. I wanted to definitely mention William Kellebrew, who was
did an
then
excellent
at the
job.
Department of Health. He may still be at the Department of Health. He and his team did a fantastic job on trauma-informed care. We were ahead of the city in terms of getting all of our folks trained on trauma-informed. It was a mandatory, the state's attorney said you have to be there, and I'll give you food. Training to really talk about trauma-informed responses, trauma-informed courtrooms, and that also happened in 2019, and William Kellebrew did a fantastic job. So we have tried to stay in lockstep with the country on this work.
Thank you so much for your answers. Just I just wanted the public to understand that you are at the forefront of equity and equality in everything that you do. So even though it wasn't a specific title of a coordinator, you know, in the guide or in the information that's given to us, that you know, that's part of the efforts of your office, and just wanted that clarification to be you know, to be known. So
Thank you,
again,
Madam Vice President.
you're welcome. Again, thank you all for what you continue to do for our city, and breaking barriers and just moving our city forward and doing your part at it. Mr. Chair, I finished my 2 questions.
All right, thank you very much. Next up, Councilman Stokes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How you doing, Madam State's Attorney?
How are
First
you,
of all,
Councilman? Always good to see you.
fine. I know you had mentioned during your first part of your presentation about some of your funding that was cut from the state. Can you explain to us, I kind of missed the part of it, how much it is and what those positions are in terms of what you asking for that money, I guess, the city to.
Absolutely, and I'll defer to Camille because this is her her what is it? Ballywag?
Bailiwick, yeah.
There you go. So I'll defer to her.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Councilman Stokes. I'll highlight 3 grants where we've most recently seen cuts. The state's attorney was talking about the Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network grant, or MSIN as we refer to it. We are a subrecipient to the Baltimore City Police Department on that grant, and FY20 we received $524,915. That funded 5 people and some software. And MSIN, just to sort of put it in lay terms, is really focused on making sure that we can have data-driven prosecutions that have the data and have the data engineers available to produce the data to really drive those cases involving syndicates and gangs and whatnot. And so we received $524,915 in FY20 as a subrecipient to BPD. In FY21, it was cut to $191,860, or 2 people plus software. So that's a loss in 1 year of $333,000 and change. BPD also suffered a loss. The city of Baltimore suffered a loss, but the governor gave increased funding to the 23 other jurisdictions in FY21. We are told that for FY22, we should expect even further cuts to MSIN, and that $600,000 will be shared, you know, I think either across for the jurisdiction. So that will significantly impact us as well. And when we lose that funding, we lose our data engineers, we lose our folks who really understand data and support the work of the prosecutors. VOCA, the state's attorney talked about the Victims of Crime Act. That was a 5-year grant, 4-year grant that ends this year. We've received $1.75 million that covers salary and fringe for 24 victim witness advocates, but we did lose our supplemental sort of wraparound funding, our ancillary funding that supports victims and witness parking, reimbursement, and some of those other costs that are critical, you know, to provide to victims and witnesses so that when they get here, they have what they need to park, to eat, to take the day off from work. And then finally, under VOCA, we ended a grant that had been 4 years called Vision 21. It supported the salary and fringe for a social worker who worked with the child victims of homicide. We lost that grant in September of 20, and it wasn't renewed. And so now we don't have a specific social worker dedicated to working with child victims of homicide. Those are just 3 examples.
And just a follow-up real quick. So what was the reason? Was there a reason why it was cut by the state? And Madam President, are you working with our state legislators to try to at least get that money restored?
So thank you for the question. I am not sure, again, about the MSIN or the Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network grant. I mean, like I said, the governor increased that funding for the 23 other jurisdictions, decreased it for Baltimore City. I can't tell you why. VOCA is a state, it's a federal grant that's a pass-through through the state. And I think that the federal dollars are being redirected to focus on present issues of the day, like police reform or looking at those sorts of issues. And so I think that, they'll reallocate those funds, and that victim services, which had been a real focus several years ago in the criminal justice space, is, it's sort of now sharing the light with police reform issues. And then Vision 21 is part of VOCA. So that would be my anecdotal take on the cuts.
Okay.
And the only thing I would add, Councilman, is that, yes, we have made the request. This is not the first time that we're making the request that we're making of the council today. We have gone out every single year and made these same exact requests, understanding and recognizing that at some point we were going to run out of this grant funding. And the need for these victim witness advocates, for example, are so incredibly important. Or these engineers, computer data analysts, engineers that are responsible for tallying and telling us exactly from an evidence-based perspective what we're doing effectively and what we're not. And so we've made the request, not just of you, but also from the state. And we've done that for the past few years, understanding that these grants would, in essence, come to an end.
And my second question is, I know we have the Return Citizens program here throughout the city, but Madam State's Attorney, do you remember when, if persons were incarcerated, they had programming inside those facilities where they was incarcerated?
Yep.
It's really disturbing that when you incarcerate somebody, you let them sit there for 5 years, they get no help whatsoever, no support. Because I know some gentlemen, ladies that come out of there, they end up doing well. Do you have data to show, or I might have to get this from the state, when those programs were in those facilities, those persons, when they came out, they did well, and once it was cut, then when they come back out, a lot of times they get no support where they are, and they go back to the same environment that they came from. Is there any data for that?
I'm sure there's plenty of data, and Michael Collins, who is my strategic policy planning director, he should be on the call as well. He can chime in. We're actually evaluating that as we speak, like thinking about ways in which we can create a reentry service or assist in the reentry process, understanding and recognizing that when you don't meet those needs behind the walls of in prison, that we're going to have to see them on the other side. And so we're actually evaluating that. Michael Collins, do you have any sort of data, or you can explain to the councilman what we've been preliminarily looking at?
Yeah, I mean, after we announced the policies, we had a lot of outreach from groups that were interested in partnering with us. And one of the things we've done is set up a kind of task force with the mayor's office and BPD, OPD and BHSB to look at the implementation of our low-level offence policy, but also look at gaps in things like re-entry, drug treatment, housing, and how can we play a role and how can we be supportive of the mayor's efforts on those issues. So that's a committee that meets once every month, and we're meeting with all sorts of stakeholders across the country to evaluate those issues.
Can you send me the email as a councilman? Am I free to come to those meetings? Because I'm curious, because we have all these new re-entry programs, and they probably came out of because they took the programs out of when people was incarcerated, and we still need them outside of there. But when you don't have none inside a facility and people sitting there for 5 years, when they come back out, they have no empathy about anything, because they go back to the same environment, and we got to find a way to put those programs back into those facilities. So I would be glad if you can attend some of those meetings. Thank you, Madam State's Attorney.
Definitely.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for joining us, Madam State's Attorney, to you and your team. I just had, sorry, okay, my notes. So I had a question about the victim assistance program that we've talked about a lot today so far. So the question I had was, can you just sort of give us an overview of the qualifications to trigger assistance, in particular, or touch on, if you could touch on, I came across a situation where there was a victim, but the case Unfortunately, the perpetrator was not brought to justice, and that victim then had issues getting help, which they still needed, obviously. Can you speak to, I guess, for folks, for cases that are there's not a closure, no justice brought, how are we able to, or is your office able to still assist people who still may have any number of needs through that program?
So yes, and I think it's a great question. We do assist victims on a day-to-day basis, even before there's a perpetrator that is brought to justice. I can tell you that was one of the reasons why we have been raising money for our emergency funds for victims and witnesses of crime, so that we can assist victims and witnesses in the immediate aftermath, understanding that they are traumatized by the actual event. That is a fund that we try to raise money for, that the state doesn't necessarily provide for us, but is an initiative out of my office. With regard to the services that we offer, it's going to depend. We have a vast array of services that we provide, and we do a threat assessment on individuals. We work with the police department even before there's a perpetrator found, to relocate people temporarily. Sometimes that goes, that would, if there's a threat and a risk to their safety, we assist in helping them secure permanent housing. We have a whole sort of criteria, and I don't know if that's what you're looking for us to read to you, but we do a whole threat assessment and determine what the actual needs of those individuals may be. And some of them may have to do with housing, some of them may have to do with employment, some of them may have to do, we go above and beyond. Arcelia, who is a former special victims prosecutor, now running the victim witness unit, has been doing an outstanding job in this role for the past few years, and has helped us and assisted us in ensuring that we're providing those services, those additional services, to 34 times the number of victims and witnesses that we serviced in my first year. So Arcelia, did you have any input for the councilman?
Yes, good afternoon, Councilman Burnett. As the state's attorney just mentioned, we do have various funding sources to assist our victims and witnesses of crime. With regards to victims needing assistance immediately in the immediate aftermath of a crime, we have our Victims Emergency Fund, and simply to qualify for that fund, the victim would reach out to our office, reach out to their advocate if they were assigned an advocate. The advocate would complete a victim's emergency application, and it's forwarded to our committee, in which I'm a part of. And we review that application, find out what the victim needs. And also, if we are able to assist, then we ask the victim for an estimate, and then we pay as much as we can that particular fee that they're looking for.
Arcelia, can you talk about some of the additional sources of funding that we utilize for victims and witnesses, not just through the emergency fund?
Sure. In addition to the Victims Emergency Fund, if the victim or witness is in need of relocation, we have funding through the Maryland States Attorneys Association to assist with those costs. In addition, we have a funding source called the VIPC, which is exclusively for relocation. So we assist the victims and witnesses of crime with permanent housing, temporary housing, rooms for rent. Also, if they want to relocate out of state, we assist with that as well. So we do have those funding sources specifically geared to funding relocation needs for our victims and witnesses of crime.
Is there anything else we're missing, Camille?
I did want to acknowledge that the city of Baltimore does also give us money for victim witness relocation. So I certainly want to recognize the city's continued support in that work. It's a big chunk of the money that we get, but much of it is driven by state and federal grants, and then the fundraising that we do, that RC's team does. But I wanted to recognize the city here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess my follow-up, well, one, it's all great to hear that there's sort of this sort of robust ecosystem. I did have two quick follow-ups, Mr. Chair, that shouldn't take lengthy responses. Well, the first would be, I guess, what would be a scenario where somebody would not be able to be helped? Like, I guess, what would disqualify somebody from getting assistance through the program?
If they don't live in the city of Baltimore,
Okay.
that's one. What else? What would be another disqualifier, RC?
If they're not a victim per se, normally we require a police report to confirm whether or not that victim is in fact a victim. So that would be another obvious criteria.
If the case isn't an active case, sometimes that may
right.
that may affect a victim's ability to access funds, and for how long you can access those funds.
Right. The length is always something that we have to reevaluate on a continual sort of basis, because there's some times where, you know, we'll help individuals out and it's way after the trial has ended and there's an expectation that we're just going to, you know, remain putting folks paying for housing when, you know, we attempt to assist and make it so that victim is in the best sort of position to be able to provide for themselves at some point. But that's, again, that's based on a case-by-case basis.
Got it. And then I guess the ecosystem of support, how much is, I guess, obviously, like a real percentage there, but how much of it is in-house? How much of it is referred out? Like, what is that sort of network of support that you all have, I guess, put together for the program?
When you say in-house, what do you mean? You mean in relocation, or what do you mean, Councilman?
Yeah, I guess, like, are there aspects of the services that are provided directly by your office versus things that are referred out?
So, I mean, we have Family Bereavement Center where we have therapists who actually provide the grief counseling sessions, licensed therapists. We do that in-house. And then we also will make referrals, right? We have partners, several partners, House of Ruth, we have, you know, Roberta's house. We have several sort of partners depending on whatever the needs of that particular victim may be. As I said, we do an assessment about the individualized needs of that individual, right? Like, we have to determine, is this a housing issue? Is this an employment issue? Is this, you know, a safety issue? And so based upon whatever the outcome of that assessment is, we do partner with other agencies, and those services that we can't provide, we will make the proper sort of referrals. Did I miss anything, guys?
For victims and witnesses of crime who need counseling and they're not homicide survivors, we do refer out to other counseling agencies such as pro bono counseling, ROAR with the University of Maryland. So we do partner, as the state's attorney did mention, with other agencies depending on the needs of the particular victim or witness.
Got it. I did have a couple other questions, Mr. Chair, but those are my two for this round.
All right, we'll come back around. Next up, Councilwoman Ramos. Councilwoman Ramos. Councilwoman Ramos, you're up next. You're on mute if you're trying to talk to us. All right, next up, Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've actually just got one question, Madam State's Attorney. In the hearing that we held maybe a month and a half ago now, where we were talking about the changes to the minor crimes unit, one of the questions I asked was that I want to know if we were considering moving any of the prosecutors to other divisions to make sure that they could bolster some of your more urgent priorities. Have you guys looked into that or considered it at all?
Yes, we have already started to consider that. Councilman, thank you for the question. We started doing that right away. The only problem that we have is that because the courts just reopened on April 26th, we have a backlog of cases that we have to get through. So that assessment is really kind of hard for us to try to take prosecutors out of like the district court when there's a backlog from 2019, 2020, and we're now 6 months into 2021. So once we get through that backlog, we're going to be able to make a better sort of and proper assessment about the reallocation of those resources. I am happy to say that we're getting through it really quickly. Michael Schatzow, we actually have already started to plan to do that and have looked at the numbers and the data. Mike, did you want to share what we've learned thus far?
Yes, I mean, due to the backlog, it's hard to analyze it, just as Mrs. Mosby said. But the district court has been working through the backlog much quicker than I think anyone anticipated. And so when the backlog is worked through in the district court, I think we will engage in conversations with the judiciary of the district court about steps they could take, which would free up which would create the ability for us to remove some of the prosecutors we have in district court and which would result in more prosecutors in the serious crime felony units. And that's our goal. That's the most, unless of course you'd like to give us more money, that's the most likely place where we're going to be able to find the resources to increase those units. And we will need the cooperation of the district court judiciary, but we have a plan to seek that cooperation. And
we've already planted a seed as well. We've made them aware that's our intent.
No, that's really, really good to hear. And I think that that'll help us a long way going forward. So thank you for the update, and that's all I have for now, Mr. Chair. Looks like we may have lost the chair.
Uh-oh. We lost you.
While he's getting on, I'll pick up and I'll go by the hands raised, and we'll start with Councilman Torrance.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Good afternoon, Madam State's Attorney and leadership.
Good afternoon, Councilman.
I have a question. It's one of the things what is your relationship with the emergencies section of housing? Because it's noticed that they had under their line item that they supported victim or intimidation persons movements because they had grants as well invested in that. I just want to know how was that impacted, because I know that they saw a loss in their line items or they had to reshuffle in their budget.
So I'm going to kick this to Schatz because he's been dealing directly with the housing authority, and they have some prosecutors that were working under the authority of our office. And so I think that he's best able to answer your question.
Thank you.
Yes, in terms of enforcement activities, there's a years ago, lost in the mists of history, there was an arrangement that was made that these prosecutors went out from our office. They went onto the budget of the housing department, and they now do what I would term housing code enforcement, as well as some related areas, theft of services for utilities, things that directly relate to housing, noise control, things like that. These prosecutors prosecute in the name of the state's attorney, and we have about 2 or 3 years ago, as a result of an incident that occurred, we have persuaded them that there are only a certain number of cases, a certain limited number of cases, where they really have to invoke the authority of the state's attorney. They're able to invoke the authority of either the city solicitor or the housing department. And so we have arranged with them to only invoke our authority on a very limited basis. And then we review with them periodically what they're doing in those areas, what their enforcement activities are. And they, from time to time, ask us to play a larger role. which we do not have the budget to do, and so we are largely resistant to that. But we cooperate with them and we talk with them about their issues and about our issues. These are almost exclusively district court cases that involve the standard of housing, the quality of housing compared to what is required by city code.
And because they're a different, Councilman, right? And their focus is a little different. The needs of their victims are far different than the needs and the services that we provide to our victims in these crimes. I mean, just clearly based off of the violence that takes place in our city, right? Like it's different. We're not talking about housing code violations. We're really talking about, you know, those that have been impacted and traumatized by serious violent crime.
Perfect. That helps me understand the relationship, because I was wondering, like, are they housing victims for that you referred to them as one of the questions I had, but that relationship, that understanding helps me understand what's happening.
No, but we work with the housing department, right? We do work with them and partner with them to house our victims of serious violent crime.
Okay. That's helpful. That's the only question I have.
Thank you, Councilman Tards. Councilman Stokes, I see your hand is still raised. Do you have another question? Councilman Stokes. Not hearing from Councilman Stokes. Any other council person on this thread? Do you have any more questions for the state's attorney? Hearing none or seeing none. State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby, we thank you again, you and your team, and the hard work that you continue to do in our city. We, as a council, appreciate, and we're here to support you. And thank you again, and best wishes for your next fiscal year.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Thank you, all of the City Council. We appreciate your support and partnership in ensuring a safer city. That's what we're fighting for every single day. And so thank you for your commitment as public servants, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to present today.
Thank you. And on that note, I think we're now in recess until 3:30 for the next agency. Marguerite, what's the next agency that's coming up at 3:30?
The Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement.
Okay. We're in recess until 3:30. Thank you.